So hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Livi. I'm, as Dallas was saying, one of the education interns, and my presentation is going to be on some of the native fall wildflowers in the area. I'm going to be talking about their history, their ecological value, and why planting them is really one of the best things that you can do for pollinators. And hopefully by the end you'll know a little bit more about some of these local species and just how you can kind of support a lot of these pollinators. So let's jump right in. Okay, so first up, I want to talk a little bit about why pollinators matter, some important context. So pollinators support a very large diversity of plant life. There are many plants that cannot reproduce without pollinators, and those plants will go on to support a lot of different animals, birds, and insect species. So they're going to be helping maintain biodiversity, which is just important because that helps make the ecosystem healthier by having a more diverse array of species, which makes it more resilient. Additionally, 1/3 of all food, so 1 in every 3 bites of food that you're eating comes from a pollinator, and 3/4 of all flowering plants are pollinated by pollinators. They can also help increase crop yields, which in turn contributes billions to the global economy. I also want to talk a little bit about why year-round blooms matter. So pollinators, like most creatures, need food and shelter all year round. So during the winter, dead seed heads and stalks are kind of important for providing a lot of food for birds and also shelter for a lot of insects that are kind of remaining over the winter. In the spring, that is when a lot of creatures are coming out of migration or hibernation or their overwintering periods. So that's just a critical time for nectar. And then the summer is a pollinator's most active foraging period. That's when you're seeing a lot of very lush blooms. And that is also when they need energy to reproduce. And then fall is especially critical due to its high energy demand. So just like spring, a lot of organisms are preparing for migration, hibernation, and overwintering. But unlike spring, when there are kind of more abundant blooms after the summer, you're going to see a lot less of that happening. And we want to make sure that we're supporting those insects and those pollinators all year round. Great. So some of the pollinators in question that I'll be talking about today are bees, butterflies, moths. Moths actually outnumber butterflies 10 to 1, which make them really, really important pollinators, especially for night blooming plants. I'm also going to be talking about flies, beetles, and hummingbirds. There are obviously more pollinators than this, but these are just some of the ones I want to highlight that you might be seeing in your gardens and all around. Great. So to start, I want to talk about some of the plant families I'll be covering today. So the first one is the Asteraceae, also known as the daisy family. So it has a very large diversity of species, over 2,500. And some of the examples you may be familiar with are daisies, dandelions, sunflowers, but some of the less conventional ones you might know are lettuce and artichoke. So in general, the Asteraceae, many of the species are known to have anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. So they've been used medicinally for many, many years and also have diuretic properties. A little bit more about the Asteraceae. They do have this special flower structure. So in this image, it may look like this is only one singular bloom, but it's actually made up of dozens and dozens of tiny flowers called florets. So this center area is made of the central disc florets, which are going to be responsible for producing pollen and nectar. And then this outer area that looks like the petals are actually called ray florets, and those are used to attract pollinators and kind of signal that there's some yummy nectar inside. So a good way to attract pollinators. The other plant family we'll be talking about today is the Campanulaceae, also known as the bellflower family. So they have 2,400 species, but they're really known for their showy bell-shaped blooms. They have a really unique kind of shape and very vibrant, nice bright colors. So they are very often favorites both in gardens and in the wild. Great. So I'm going to be starting with the first plant I'll be talking about today, which is Joe Pyeweed. This is one of the members of the Asteraceae family. But pollinators love this plant, and as you're about to see, they really, really love this plant. I have so many great photos of butterflies really enjoying a good snack from this season. But gardeners also really adore them. It was the 2017 North Carolina Wildflower of the Year. And I'd like to go into a little bit its naming convention. So Joe Pyeweed does have some medicinal values, but it's named after Joseph Shequethquot, who was a Mohican leader and healer, and he used this flower to kind of treat things like fevers and cramps.
Livi, did you take all of these?
Yes. Wow. So unless it says the photo credit, these are my photos, which is pretty cool. So this is unfortunately not mine. But Joe Pyeweed are valuable for more than just their flowers. So when those seed heads dry, they become really valuable food sources for birds, especially during the winter when food is a little bit more scarce. And a fun fact is that 30% of bees build their nests above ground, and the stems of Joe Pyeweed are hollow, which makes really, really great places for shelter for these bees. So these bees will kind of crawl their way in and lay their eggs, and then the next season, the larva will emerge and do all the things that bees do. Great. And then here's just a little bit more about Joe Pyeweed, just some of the kind of important facts. It's a perennial from the Asteraceae family. A lot of the plants we'll be talking about today really like a lot of the same conditions, which is why they do well in this area. They like a good amount of sun. They're blooming in summer to fall, and they do like that moist, well-draining soil. A lot of the plants we'll be talking about today are going to be liking those exact same conditions. Chance to read. The next plant I'm going to be talking about is goldenrod. So goldenrod is also a pollinator magnet. You can see in this image there's lots of bees hanging out around there. It also attracts a lot of moths, butterflies, and wasps. But it's actually valuable for more than just those pollinators. So goldenrod supports over 115 Lepidoptera species, so moths and butterflies. So those young caterpillars will eat the shoots and leaves of goldenrod, and just like Joe Pyeweed, those seed heads are going to dry out and become really great food during the winter. Next, I want to talk about a common misconception about goldenrod. So many people blame goldenrod for their fall allergies, but actually goldenrod's pollen is a little bit too heavy to be carried by wind, which is why it relies so heavily on attracting pollinators. So the more likely culprit is ragweed, because that does have a pollen that is wind dispersed. And unless you're sticking your face directly into goldenrod plants, ragweed is probably going to be the one that's causing any fall seasonal allergies. But in general, goldenrod is a really, really valuable native plant for wildlife and people. There are over 100 native species, and it's generally just seen as a hardy, reliable native perennial. Great. So goldenrod also does get a bad rap for being a little bit aggressive. There are species like Canada and late goldenrod that are sometimes seen as a little messy because they do have a tendency to spread pretty dramatically, but these species are really, really great for meadows and restoration projects, so they can help reclaim an area, support all the wildlife in that area, and just generally improve it. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit tidier for your garden, there are many, many species of goldenrod, like blue-stemmed goldenrod and showy goldenrod, that are going to be a better fit for your garden, going to be a little bit more manageable and easier to handle. Next, I want to talk a little bit about spittlebugs. So if you're unfamiliar with them, so was I until recently. So when I was starting this project, I was trying to take a lot of walks and kind of familiarize myself with what was in bloom, and along the way on one of these walks, I noticed these kind of strange foamy blobs on the plants, and after doing some research, I learned that these were caused by spittlebugs. First, I want to clarify that spittlebugs are not particular to goldenrod. They're really not picky eaters, so you'll see them on a lot of different kinds of plants, but I just happened to see them on goldenrod. But essentially what's happening here is young spittlebug nymphs are feeding on the plant tissue, kind of processing that in their bodies, and then they're releasing this kind of foam-like substance that's providing them with protection and insulation. And this really only causes very minimal damage to the plant, so it's not something you should be worried about if you're seeing. It's just a cool phenomenon that I wanted to highlight. It's a fun name. Next, I want to talk about the goldenrod gallfly. So essentially, they are a fly that will lay their eggs in goldenrod stems, and then as that larva hatches and kind of eats its way into the plant, it will secrete this chemical that causes the plant to form a gall, which is basically this kind of abnormal growth, but that is providing protection for the larva. It's just creating this big, large bump that is sometimes kind of hard to see in the plant if you're not looking, but that is going to be one larva inside this big structure. But it's not all that easy being a goldenrod gallfly. There are some predators that they have to think about, but what's tricky is if you are too small, if your gall is very small, you're going to be targeted by parasitic wasps because they prefer smaller galls because it's easier for them to lay their eggs in alongside the gallfly, so their wasp larva will hatch and have a nice meal as soon as they open their eyes. But if you are too big, then some woodpeckers and chickadees and other birds may target you because they see a big gall and they think it's a big, good meal, and they will crack that baby open and have a nice little snack inside. So you're trying to find the kind of middle balance if you're a goldenrod gallfly. And then I'm not quite done with galls. So you may have seen the galls of the goldenrod bunch midge. And this is a kind of a leafy rosette made up of many, many galls. So there are probably a dozen or so midges living inside that one flower-like structure. And that is also protecting the larva. But goldenrods are pretty cool. They host 50 species of gall-making insects, and 2/3 of those happen to be midges. And galls typically don't have a major effect on the goldenrod plant. Although it does cause this very dramatic change, it's really only causing very minimal damage. And then here's just a little bit more context on goldenrod, and on the right there is a great picture of what some of those seed heads look a little bit more dry, and you can see why birds think that's a great snack. It's going to have a lot of the same conditions as Joe Pyeweed. It's also a perennial from the Asteraceae. It does like a good amount of sun and that moist, well-draining soil that we talked about earlier. And then the next plant we're going to be talking about is also from the Asteraceae. It is commonly called aster, but I need to clarify that it is not scientifically aster. So when this plant was first discovered, they thought it was related to the aster genus from Eurasia. But after doing some DNA evidence in the 1990s, they discovered that the species are actually not at all related. So even though it is still commonly known as aster, it was reclassified to the Symphytotrichum genus. It was North Carolina Wildflower of the Year in 2000, and it blooms at a nice late time in the season, so it's providing that essential nectar for all those pollinators that really need it to get through that final push. Aster also supports over 100 caterpillar species, so it's another great plant that is going to be supporting pollinators at multiple levels, so not just those butterflies that you're seeing, but those caterpillars that are sometimes a little bit more vulnerable. And aster is also deer and rabbit resistant. It's generally a pretty hardy plant. It has a nice fibrous root system that helps increase soil stability, and it can handle some really tough cutbacks and come back twice as strong after. It can also be salt and drought tolerant, and as you can see in these images, it comes in many color varieties. So you may see it in purple and white, but it's also been known to appear in colors like like blue and pink. Next, I want to talk about the pearl crescent butterfly. So this is one of the most common and widespread butterflies across the US, but it's typically overlooked because it does have a really small size. But they are generalists, meaning that they can survive in a variety of habitats and a variety of conditions. They're pretty happy eating whatever, but they do like to lay their eggs on asters, and doing so, they'll produce 2 to 4 broods a year. They're named for the small white crescent shape on the underside of their hind wing, which you can't see here because they're typically pretty hard to get a photo of, and thankfully these guys were a little bit preoccupied, so I was able to get that photo for now. But they're a pretty tricky species. They are very skittish, so if you get close, they'll typically fly away. Great, and then here's just a little bit more about aster. As you can see, it does withstand some drier soil conditions. It is drought tolerant, so compared to the other plants that we've been talking about already today, it's gonna be able to withstand a couple more settings and conditions. The next plant I'm going to be talking about is cardinal flower. So this is our first plant from the Campanulaceae. It is known for its striking red blooms, so it's named after its resemblance to Roman Catholic cardinals, just like the bird. But it's a very popular flower among gardeners. It won North Carolina Wildflower of the Year in 1982, 1983, and 2001.
They liked it so much in 82 that they said, let's
Roll it back, roll it back. It does have a bit of a medicinal history. It's been used to treat things like fevers and cramps. And then I'm going to talk about in the next slide its connection to hummingbirds, and it has a very, very special relationship with the ruby-throated hummingbird. They've kind of evolved together and have a really strong bond. So this is a hummingbird feeding from a cardinal flower. As you can see, it is rubbing its head directly on the anther of the flower, which is that male reproductive organ that's producing pollen for reproduction, but it's basically sticking its whole head into the flower and it's fitting perfectly. But when it's rubbing its head against the anther, a little bit of pollen is just being deposited on its head, which is so perfect because cardinal flowers bloom in a kind of interesting way. So on one stalk, you'll have multiple flowers, but it will bloom from bottom to top. Those flowers on the bottom will develop that anther first, so they'll all be male flowers, and then more blooms will move upward, developing those male flowers as well. And then over time, those ones that bloomed first will eventually develop into the female reproductive organ, the stigma. So as a hummingbird moves up and down the stalk, it will encounter both male and female flowers, ensuring that it will get a nice thorough pollination. But I just love all those images of the hummingbirds perfectly fitting into those flowers. I think it's very nice that they've perfectly made that relationship.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did I hear you correctly that the male thingamabobber?
Yeah, the anther. Yes.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, they're slowly over time converting. So basically the anther develops first, and then eventually the stigma is going to emerge from there as well.
Have you come across another flower that also does that?
I don't think any of the ones I'll be talking about today do that, but I know there are many other plant varieties that have that behavior. It's pretty interesting, yeah. And then here's a little bit more about cardinal flowers. It is also going to like that full sun. It's a perennial, but it does like the soil to be a little bit more moist. You are sometimes going to see these around water or areas that don't have as great drainage because they do like to kind of soak up what's all around them. And the other plant from the Campanulaceae I'll be talking about today is great blue lobelia. So I like to call it cardinal flowers blue twin because it likes a lot of the same conditions. It likes that same moist soil, that same sun conditions. So they're really great when they're planted together. It was North Carolina Wildflower of the Year in 1993, so it is unfortunately the less popular twin, but I think it's okay with that because it gets to do some different things. So for its medicinal history, it has been used to treat ailments like cramps, but it's also been used as an anti-divorce remedy. So essentially, they would take the flower, kind of grind it up, and place it in the food of a couple. So if a couple was fighting, they'd sneak this into their food to resolve whatever marital issues they had going on and keep them together. And then great blue lobelia is also deer and rabbit resistant. So both cardinal flower and this plant have leaves that can be a little bit toxic to certain mammals. So they tend to avoid this plant. They which protects those blooms. So while cardinal flower was loved by hummingbirds, great blue lobelia is beloved by bees. So in this video, you'll see a bee really finding its way into the whole flower, but great blue lobelia is visited by a variety of long-tongued bees. Some of those examples would be bumblebees, honeybees, and carpenter bees. They're essentially able to kind of pry open the lips of the flower and dunk their whole bodies in, which really does ensure a thorough pollination. They're very happy to stick their whole bodies in there. But something kind of interesting happens when you plant cardinal flower and great blue lobelia together. And before I fully get into that, I need to explain color preferences for certain pollinators. So hummingbirds and butterflies have very, very strong senses of vision. Hummingbirds are really drawn to colors like red, orange, and purple, particularly red and orange because their eyes are just kind of programmed to be drawn to those. And butterflies are also going to like very vibrant colors. You'll see them liking red, orange, pink, yellow, blue, anything that's very bright and vibrant in the environment. But bees cannot actually see red, so they're drawn to colors more like blue, purple, and yellow. So bees can also see ultraviolet pigments, so unless there's some ultraviolet pigment, they're not going to be able to see red at all. So if you have cardinal flower and great blue lobelia, bees are going to be much more drawn to the lobelia, while butterflies and hummingbirds are going to be seen more on the cardinal flower. And as I was saying, the two lobelia plants are twins. They really like a lot of the same conditions. They're from a lot of the same areas. They really do well when planted together because then you can get a nice diversity of species in your garden. And then the last plant I'll be talking about today is from the Asteraceae. So this is black and brown-eyed Susans, also known as the Rudbeckia genus. So the plant is named after a ballad that was written by a man named John Gay. Essentially, what it was about was a woman named Susan, obviously, saying goodbye to her lover, who was a sailor, and they weren't sure when they were going to see each other again, but the dark center of the flower is kind of the origin of the black-eyed Susan name. So these are pioneer plants, so they're really great at establishing an area and kind of revitalizing it, so they can help stabilize the soil because they also have a very fibrous root system that kind of helps keep everything in place. They're very good at attracting pollinators, and then when those seed heads dry out, they're also going to be a good food source for a lot of different species. They're also generally pretty hardy. They can be deer resistant and also drought tolerant as well. It was also, black-eyed Susan was North Carolina Wildflower of the Year in 1988. And then the way to tell the difference between the two of them, brown-eyed Susans are generally going to be a little bit taller and have a little bit of a lighter cone, a little bit more brown shaded than the black-eyed Susans. Great, and as you're about to see in the image I'm going to show, there is a subtle color difference as you move from the center of the flower to the tip. It might be a little bit hard to see because it is a little bit subtle, but there is a darker yellow pigment in this area, and then as you move down to the tip, it does get a little bit lighter. And the reasoning behind that is because these are a plant that have UV pigment, so ultraviolet pigment, and these are just a way to signal and attract pollinators to say, I have nectar, please come over here and pollinate me. And it really creates just like a target-like image for those pollinators to come right in and have a good meal. So this image on the top left is how a human views these plants. This is just an image showing reflected UV light. And then this on the bottom left is how a bee is able to view a black or brown-eyed Susan. And then this over here is a butterfly vision. So as we were talking about earlier, you can see that bee color preference for blue and those vibrant colors coming in. It's pretty interesting to see just how differently other creatures see the world. And then here is just a little bit more about these species. So sometimes black and brown-eyed Susans are biennial, so they are a little bit more short-lived than some of the other plants that we've seen today, but they do have the ability to self-seed if undisturbed. And they are also going to be liking a lot of sun and that moist, well-draining soil, which we've kind of seen a lot of the members of the Asteraceae prefer, which is good because those are the conditions that we have here. Great. So I want to kind of close out with some of the ways that we can help. So by planting a variety of native wildflowers, we are able to support a variety of pollinators and support them through a variety of seasons. So this is incredibly important to having a diversity of pollinators because, as we were talking about at the beginning, that does increase our biodiversity. And like we were saying with cardinal flowers and great blue lobelia, different plants attract different pollinators and for special and interesting ways. Another way you can help out is by leaving seed heads and stalks. A lot of the plants I've talked about do dry out and become valuable food sources for birds, or like Jill pieweed, those stalks can be a really great habitat for bees or other plants that are going to need that cover during the winter. Generally, we want to be avoiding using any harsh chemicals. Even products that claim to be ecologically friendly sometimes have an inadvertent effect on some of our most sensitive insects like fireflies. And there are alternatives to harsh chemicals. There are more natural remedies like using strained garlic or crushed chili pepper. There are also alternatives that sometimes require a little bit more work but might see some better results. So for example, you might want to have your garden kind of attract a lot of predators for things that you're worried about. So if your garden has trouble with aphids, then you might want to consider planting something that will attract ladybugs, like plants with kind of wide heads like dill. There are also all sorts of technological advancements and gadgets that can kind of help deter some of the pests in your yard that you don't want. There are things called predator eye lights, and they will essentially kind of simulate the eye flash of a predator and scare away anything that you might necessarily not want there. But in general, we want to be thinking of our yard as a habitat because we live on land that is part of a larger environment, and we have to really treat it like that. And already today, you are supporting local initiatives, so thank you for showing up today. FIND is a great organization that really does a lot of work to protect our public lands and also encourage people to get outdoors and learn about their environments. And next year, FIND will be having some native and pollinator gardens installed at the Cradle of Forestry, so it's a great thing to check out. So, yeah. So essentially, in conclusion, we want to be planting for pollinators in every season, especially fall, because of those really critical demands and a lot of things that will support pollinators. So here's some of my many sources, but thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.